Whew. Okay, here we go. Let's do this. Something's not quite. That's better. What's going on, guys? So today I want to talk about something a little different, and that's personal projects. Now, personal projects are so incredibly important to me, especially in these current events, this current situation, because for me, as somebody who's completely self-employed, who relies exclusively on the photography industry and the videography industry for any source of income, I'm pretty much left to my own devices right now. I have all the time in the world, and it's more than enough time to either A, learn and grow and skill build and all this cool stuff, or B, go crazy. And without anything specific to work on, without a goal, without something to achieve, without a goalpost to kind of aim for, it's way too easy to just sit at home and just play video games all day, which is nice, but not 7 days a week, and leaves, me with the situation that post COVID-19, post pandemic, I, was basically hibernating. And today we're going to relate that to an image that you hopefully have already seen. This is actually a picture that I helped Rob Hall take when we were out in Vegas last February of 2020 at WPPI, the Wedding and Portrait Photography Expo. Oh. This is what happens when I don't have a teleprompter, is everything just immediately falls apart. But we actually made a stop, a super rare and totally creative and never before seen stop to the dry lake bed. And we were fortunate enough to work with an incredible twerk team USA, big shout out, who are not only the coolest twerk team in the world, the most talented twerk team in the world, but also the most patient twerk team in the world, as they even took some time post-shoot to try to help me and Rob's super caucasic asses try to learn to twerk. And I'm gonna tell you right now, I have no skills to show for it yet, so don't even ask. But this shot is actually the result of months and months of planning on Rob's part. And so first and foremost, I want to kind of step away from taking any credit for it, because honestly, outside of the timing and my ability to push a button, 99% of the wonders of this image here are actually attributed to Rob's ability to plan ahead, to understand his equipment, and to have a clear vision. And it's definitely the product of somebody who's done this a lot on the fly, and now all of a sudden has months and months to kind of just really marinate. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, maybe a half a year before this picture was taken, it was described to me. And when I pictured it, this is exactly what I saw. So big kudos to Rob. Tiny kudos to me for the timing, but honestly, between the planning and him selling it with that emotion, it's such an incredibly fun shot and so insanely meme-lordy that I just don't care. It's amazing. Once it was taken, Rob had this big dream of taking it to the next level by having a wonderfully and insanely talented gentleman named Dustin take a look at it and kind of give it his secret sauce. But with everything that's been going on, it didn't really pan out. So it finally saw the light of day, unedited, missing all the next level flair that was intended for it. But I suggested, and it was a brilliant idea on my part, to just kind of open it up for a Photoshop contest. If you're familiar with Reddit Photoshop battles, for instance, definitely something in that vein. And thankfully it's taken off. It was put up for that exact reason. Rob offered the raw image up on the Dropbox link. And we have some incredible examples of some incredibly talented people getting their hands on it and doing some cool stuff with it. But I actually wanted to take an opportunity here to go back to what I was mentioning earlier and make a personal project out of it. And lately, my big goal post for this pandemic is to actually lean away. I shouldn't say away, but to kind of add to my skill set and kind of branch off into motion graphics and kind of learn a bit more of After Effects and kind of take Premiere to another level and even do some stuff in Illustrator to just kind of round everything out, at the very least to make this channel better, but who knows, potentially to open myself up for more work opportunities. But it's a hard thing to do when you don't have things to work on, especially for my ADHD brain, to find the wherewithal and the vision to actually focus on progression in just this blank canvas is not the easiest thing to do. And so instead, what I lean into is personal projects. I try to find small goals or missions or just, challenges to give myself a clear path, oftentimes exclusively based on a specific skill set or ability or effect or whatever that I know that I don't have yet. And so I've done this for all kinds of things. I've built this here, this totally pointless logo animation for Rob. I was looking into getting some college work. I did this quick animation for CMU. Just all kinds of stuff. I built this space intro for my gaming channel that basically doesn't exist because it was a little unrealistic to turn my pastime into work. And little things like this have just helped me kind of take big leaps in ways that just sitting down with the tutorial don't really accomplish for me. And so to find something that is specific and is direct that I can lean into has just made such immediate, obvious leaps for me in skill sets. And so for this one specifically, I wanted to create this. And as terrifying as this is, it actually employs a number of things that I kind of wanted to figure out that might never actually have an applicable use as a whole, but hopefully in its pieces can definitely turn into some upgrades along the way nonetheless. And I figured today we can kind of break down all the steps that went into this and take a deeper dive on what exactly it means to have a personal project and how incredibly important they are. So let's just hop right in the computer and... All right, so I figured the best way to approach this is to just come at it in the same way that it was accomplished. So we're just going to do things kind of linearly, and we'll build kind of from the base that I started at, and we'll get to the final product, and hopefully that'll keep it the most optimized and also the most logical for you. But first step was technically in Capture One. I specifically used it to kind of get the best sharpening on here, to kind of keep everything really clean, to pull the the noise down as much as possible. And oh my, the newest version, Capture 120, is definitely incredible for noise reduction. We still have a little bit of grain in here, but I'm going to be honest with you, it would take quite a bit of processing that just wasn't going to be necessary or noticed to get that out of there. I also made a conscious decision not to stylize or edit this image too much, just because I knew at the very least if I really wanted to kind of flesh it out and do all this stuff, I could do it at the very end and I would have full control and it would be much easier to deal with. So what we have here is just a very clean process. And really quick, just kind of going through here piece by piece, we have a separation of the ground. I then went through and used content-aware fill and got really lucky that it didn't do a perfect job. You're going to see a lot of results here that I don't think would fly for a high-res image. I don't think would fly for any sort of commercial work or anything like that, but I knew that once we stack filters and it gets square cropped and put on Instagram and God knows how many pixels we have left, all that was going to kind of melt away anyway. So I figured as long as our tones are good, that we can kind of get all the way there and be pretty comfortable with it. So again, we got really lucky with content aware. I only had to kind of fill in some spots here where the sharpness from the depth of field just didn't really make sense and kind of gave itself away. But again, it's not perfect by any means, but it definitely gives a nice clean result. So then we obviously then add the sky as its own separate layer. And this one was a little bit trickier. And a little tip for you guys is when you pull something clean like this, and I again used content aware fill, got very lucky, often what you'll be left with is the exact shape of what you just pulled will be very clear, and the reason for that usually is noise, and Photoshop is working very hard to kind of cover up those things and kind of just blend them out so that it quote unquote looks better, but it ends up being kind of a dead giveaway. And the super easy fix for that is to then take that same shape, that same path, preferably with a little bit of a feather, pull that, and using the patch tool, just pull something similar and it'll actually take the texture of the noise itself, and that goes a long way to covering that up. So next up was going to be the legs. And oh boy, the legs is kind of the first spot where we see some of the discrepancy, that I mentioned with the ground coming really into play here, because you'll see we've got some artifacts up here. You got to figure, really, once we get on Instagram, this is what we're looking at. So again, number one priority for me was matching kind of lighting and tone. and even lighting, let's be honest, you could pick apart pretty quickly once this is in motion. But I got really lucky with actually pulling a patch of this entire leg and flipping it and rotating it. It was just such a clean drop that it was very serendipitous, but this shoe was almost completely obstructed on the back half here. And so what we're actually looking at is a composite using this shoe, copied it, pasted it, flipped it, and then warped it in Liquify to kind of shape match over this. And so again, once you come in and really look at it, it looks objectively terrible, but because the texture and the color is so close, it really goes a long way to sell it regardless. Pulling out we're gonna call it the hammer here, but the light and the stand was very easy, a lot of hard shapes, no issues there. I made a creative decision to skip the bulb altogether. The obvious catch is that now the lighting is kind of consistent on here, but once we stack effects on it, I don't think it was too bad. And then coming back up, we have arms. The arms were pretty fun. They're just pen tooled with like a 1 pixel feather. Thankfully, because Rob made the artistic decision to backlight and to have a very sharp light, we have hard edges, we have very clean edges that are pretty easy to work with. And actually another really helpful thing that I learned in this process is originally these arms were cut hard. They were just a hard edge on the shoulder here. When I would bring these into After Effects and they would turn, the edge just looked horrible, and it had the exact 2001 puppet, whatever, creepy animation feel to it that I was hoping to at least try to avoid. And I was very happy to see that the dynamic linking for PSDs from Photoshop to After Effects is so smart that I can pull up the PSD and just drop a mask on here on these different shoulder joints, save it, and it updates live in After Effects, and the difference is huge. I was very happy to see that made all the difference in the world. But again, we got the torso here. This actually is another example of, this is probably the worst example of kind of working from nothing, where we could have really gone through and like maybe built a patch of like fabric from like a stock image or something. But this is another example of once all the elements are in motion, it really isn't that big of a deal. The discrepancy is so low. But now I think this is the creepiest part, so apologies for the nightmares, but now we get into territory of the head, which has technically the most animation to it. And a few things that I really wanted to make sure of was to, one, kind of pull the edge of the actual beard up so that we didn't have, if it was bopping around, if it was moving, we didn't have any sort of like falling back into its original seated position. So we wanted to make sure that it was fully free floating. That really would sell that effect of like the jaw opening and closing. But love my boy Rob Hall to death, but I think even he would be tired of staring at my face zoomed in like this for hours at a time. Another interesting solution that we had to use here is, you'll notice on the left we have the finished cut portion, and then on the right here we have our original image. And what I ended up having to do is something that is not too uncommon when you have to do hair selection, because hair selection sometimes can be easy to get like a close to perfect pull from, but a lot of times it's just not possible. And the solution is often to actually just draw back in the hair itself. And it's exactly what we did here, because you'll notice that like down here, if I had just pulled, if I had made a guess, it would have just looked horrible. There's just no data here. So what we ended up doing was taking a brush with a specific transfer setting. And you'll probably see this if you ever see like a, hair selection tutorial. A lot of times they'll talk about this, where you're just pulling the transfer down quite a bit to give it a more natural fall off. And so stacking this, doing a bit of dodging, doing a bit of burning, stacking, definitely lays a good foundation. But I'll be honest, one of the things I noticed makes the biggest difference is, again, the same thing that we had with the sky background, is making sure to then, when it's all done, add in noise that we can at least try to approximate back towards our original source material. So you'll notice there's like a little bit of color noise in here. Definitely makes it so that we have this really clean looking edge that when it's moving just feels a lot more realistic. All right, so we're in After Effects, and immediately becomes clear that we're just dealing with a lot of elements. Almost all of these are separate compositions. If you're not familiar with After Effects, they're all different renders of different effects and different pieces that all kind of stack up. And I learned a lot about the importance of naming, the importance of structure, the importance of organization. And if I was to do this again, I would for sure organize these things by folders. Looking at this real quick, we can see all of those pieces labeled and named from our Photoshop file that are all pulled into their own separate layers. And then we did a separate one for the head just because it's so complicated. and I wanted to be able to move the whole thing independently as well. And really quick, I want to give 2 shout outs here that really helped make this possible. One is surprisingly to Adobe. I usually only utter Adobe's name or speak of them when I have something to complain about. That's probably true for most designers, but I really gotta say there's so many times during this process that I had to like really check myself and realize that a good portion of why this is working and why this is working on such an expeditious timeline is the fact that in After Effects, there are built so many cleverly designed and very optimized and just very powerful effects that we're able to take advantage of, and even just kind of at an instant have a really good understanding of what they're capable of and kind of have a really good understanding of how customizable they are. But the other big shout out that I have is actually for Andrew Kramer of Video Copilot. He has an hour-long tutorial on advanced lighting and a handful of different ways that we can kind of use it to accomplish different tasks. And even though it's an hour long, which let's be honest, isn't actually that long to like learn a whole skill, it's so succinct, it's so entertaining, it's so helpful, and it definitely is the reason that I was able to accomplish this video at all. So big shout out to him. If you ever need to look up something on video effects and you're just getting started, definitely check out videocopilot.com/tutorials, and they have just absolutely so many basics and stuff that's way beyond that. So big shout out to him. Amazing presenter, amazing teacher. Other than the lightning, one of the big effects that we're actually taking advantage of here is actually the puppet pins. And the puppet pins allow us to put a hard anchor on a rasterized image, and then After Effects is clever enough to be able to warp those things with an understanding of these pins and these anchor points of sorts. There's definitely ways that we could do this with like heavy rigging and things like that that are beyond my understanding and are definitely making it on the list of things that I'll have to learn in the future, but this is such a beautiful and quick, dirty way to do it because it offers this ability to kind of warp in a way that on a small scale, I think is actually pretty incredible effect. You'll notice we have a little bit of a mask here to mask out the handle of the flash. This is really as simple as having our final position, which was the original image, and then pinning it out, and then just going to the beginning, setting our like in frames, you know, bending it in, doing all this jazz, and then as simple as going back out and bringing those keyframes over to here. So it's really almost like a 2-part thing, and only the timing really changes to kind of give it the effect that it's, you know, a different movement, but mostly just to kind of keep things from being stale. And that effect covers every single piece of this cutout. We have small movements on like the hammer, just rotating and bending, but we have even more advanced ones on like the legs where everything from like the ankles and everything are kind of pinned out. There's even a bit of like scale deformity to the torso, and it's very subtle, but it definitely lends itself to like the abs or the like whole torso kind of crunching in. The bulk of this is actually in the face. And the face itself is made up of 3 elements here, and I knew going into it that I was going to need to kind of pull the teeth separately, because as we open our mouths, our lips don't stay in the same shape, in the same position. As we open them, they slowly roll back along the gum line as they get more and more taut. So I knew I was going to want to kind of match the jaw movement to the teeth and then change the entire shape of the lips in the process without having it be kind of too gnarly and warped, which we did end up kind of doing for the upper lip here. This is more of a stylistic choice just to kind of really sell the scale of the mouth. But you can see here, if we jump to our pins, we're just smothered. And the reason for this is to definitely add some like viscosity to the overall shape of the face so that things aren't just being yanked and pulled in every direction when another part is moved. And what laying out all of these pins does is it adds kind of weight to the whole shape of the face. Even though the only pins that are animated are right here and the outside of the beard, you'll see there's movement kind of throughout the whole image. But we just have an expansion of the mouth that's added 100% in post, and you'll see the teeth. The teeth match almost a little too well, but they kind of imply the shape of the jaw moving underneath the beard and even underneath the lips. I originally thought about doing something with the eyes, but 1, it would take the creep factor up to 11, and 2, I ended up being able to kind of distract from the whole thing with just these blurred orbs over the eyes, giving it that kind of Mortal Kombat Raiden vibe. Going back to effects from that Video Copilot tutorial, this backdrop is actually just a series of smoke sprites. It's literally one sprite that's just copy and pasted in different sizes, opacities, and then rotated independently, different sizes moving at different speeds, yada, yada, yada. A little tiny bit, I believe, of turbulent warp to kind of keep them from just looking too much like, well, this. What it accomplishes when your opacities are set up right is an incredibly powerful effect. which I always love jumping to the actual lightning behind it because it just looks terrible, but I really had to amp it up to 11 to make sure that it stood out from the background here. And the way that that's accomplished is we actually have a gradient mask that thankfully really kind of helps match up with this sun setting where the exposure would have kind of bled out the effect anyway if this was real. And so, that gives us this really nice add blend that doesn't exclusively detract from the sky exposure, even if in real life it 100% would. It just looks a lot better than just plunking it in there. Jumping back to this advanced lightning effect, one of the kind of center elements for it is it dancing along the head of the hammer or the flash head. And this is actually accomplished incredibly simply by just building a mask that's the shape of the hammerhead and letting it have this alpha obstacle setting that kind of just inhibits where it can go. And then if you dial it back just a little bit, it makes it very clear that it's influenced by this shape, but it also is kind of able to escape when it's overcharged, for instance. And then it's just a matter of kind of animating the quantity and the density of it over time just to kind of sync up with the strike, and then just letting it kind of fade out. But you'll see, so it just looks like it's kind of wrapping around an actual cubed shape, and you just take that effect, that composition, and you just track it to the movement of the head. Bada bing, bada boom. You'll notice here the reason for making a cutout of the ground is so that we actually have full control over the exposure from, the actual hammerhead. And all that really is taking the original background, taking the one that's clean, and building one that's overexposed and just having a mask cut out and follow it to kind of give it a little bit of depth. One of the last things to come in is this just general white exposure wipe, and I can't get over how much it helps to kind of sell this effect. And then very last is actually the arms. The arms are set up in a very similar way to the hammerhead in that there is a rough, kind of slightly larger than the original outline of the arms that, if you build the alpha obstacle up just right, kind of just lends the effect that they're dancing around the arms and not just on top of them. And I just absolutely love how effective that was. Anyway, before we jump out of the computer, I just really want to stress how important personal work can be in not only keeping you busy, but keeping your skills up, keeping you honed. For me, it's offered me a significant amount of purpose that just kind of was immediately ripped once your actual work life disappears. And for somebody that struggles with things like depression and anxiety and things like that, I truly believe that personal projects and finding ways to kind of focus myself and give myself purpose in these times has gone so far in just kind of keeping my sanity and keeping my attitude and everything up and keeping me relevant even more specifically. All right, guys, so I hope that was helpful. I hope that it's given you some ideas as to what is possible with personal projects, and honestly, sky's the limit because we have at least for most of us creatives right now, we have all the time in the world. So why not find fun ways to make use of it, and hopefully at the other end of it, which fingers crossed isn't so long from now, we can come out better, improved in ways that we potentially would have been if we had been busy. So let me know if you have any cool personal projects that you've tried out that you have learned from. Let me know if there's some pretty obvious ways that I could have done this better. Let's be honest, there's probably a million ways I could have done this better. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for tuning in. Peace. Side note, this is the lamest YouTube flex ever. Shout out to Aperture though. This is so painless. I mean, ooh, what you know. Ooh, future. Okay, bye.